We're live on YouTube.
Magandang umaga po sa ating mga media partners and to our guest speakers for today's Kapihan Session. Also with us are representatives and participants from our CHDs po. So we are now live via YouTube and our other social media channels. And I am Lindsay and I will be moderating today's Kapihan. So our session for today is in celebration of the Road Safety Month and with the theme Safety First on the Road para sa Healthy Pilipinas. So as the country implements community quarantine to prevent the spread of COVID-19, our day-to-day activities also started to adapt to this new normal. So the limited transport services we have now paved the way for other modes of transportation that is crucial for essential travel of the public. Hence, it is very important that we advocate and promote road safety among active transport users in the country. So to further provide our media partners and our viewers and our participants from the CHDs more about our initiatives in road safety and active transport, here with us today are Dr. Beverly Lorraine Ho, Director 4 of the Health Promotion Bureau of the Department of Health, and Mr. Robert C. Jr. of MUVAS One Coalition. So first to present po is Dr. Ho. She is also the concurrent director of the DOH Disease Prevention and Control. Doc Bev.
Okay, can we show the presentation now? Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sir Rob. Thank you for joining us this morning. And to our media partners, maraming salamat po ulit sa pakikinig in advance. All right. So this month, we're celebrating Road Safety Month, and we're hoping that all of you can help us in our advocacy. Next slide, please. So we at the Health Promotion Bureau of the DOH and the Disease Prevention and Control Bureau, we ascribe to this framework that you see on screen. So basically, when we talk about health, oftentimes we are led to think that health is about hospitals and clinics, but in reality, that really just accounts for around 20% of total health of populations. And the remaining 80% is a mix of socioeconomic factors, healthy behaviors, and environment. Next slide, please. However, when we talk about healthy behaviors, we also need to understand that it's not just about the health literacy of the person or the knowledge, how well the person knows about certain types of behavior, but his social networks, her population or community, but more importantly, the blue boxes that you see, the attributes of the place at the local or even at the regional and national or global level, all of that affects the behavior of the people in the population. Next slide, please. And this is very important when we talk about our topic today. So did you know that around 25% of household owners in the Philippines own motorcycles and around 5.9% or 6% own a car? And that would mean that the remainder of the population would actually be pedestrians and commuters, So they walk or they commute to work, to do essential services, etc. Next slide, please. And we also know that prior to the pandemic, a typical commuter, would spend a minimum of 1.5 to 2 hours on the road. And after the pandemic, this drastically changed to even a more difficult situation wherein there are actually less options for a commuter. However, we would also like to emphasize that this 1.5 to 2 hours, whether we go back to this after the pandemic or not, this is obviously not part of what we would consider as a healthy lifestyle, right? Because you're essentially sitting in sedentary mode within the public transport. No? Next slide, please. And so with this, we know, yes, we would know that the road safety in the country has the following statistics. No? So between 2005 and 2015, particularly in Metro Manila, 57,000 pedestrians have been injured. No? And this is based on our joint work with MMDA. And you will see that the data on injuries by the vehicle type are as follows. No? So motorcycle accounts for the largest, followed by cars, then jeepneys, then trikes, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Similarly, the deaths reflect a similar trend, no? So it's just that from motorcycles, it becomes cars, and then the second highest would be trucks, followed by jeeps. Next slide, please. So because of all these challenges, one of the critical projects that we have undertaken alongside our civil society partners is active transport. No? So this was much needed during the pandemic. Next slide, please. And it has the following benefits. No? First, accessibility. Because supposedly you don't get stuck in traffic or wait in lines. You're also really able to move from one place to another without having to really think about whether there's public transport that will be available during that time. There are obviously health benefits. That's why we're really pushing for this. Better moods lead to increased productivity at work. Healthier employees are absent less, decreases risk of obesity and NCDs, and improved air quality. There's also proven studies already on company savings and increases in the value, the property of the land after active transport infrastructure is actually put in place. Next slide, please. However, it is going to be very difficult to push for this when road crashes will continue to be a threat. So parang how can we actually encourage people to go active transport when road crashes are there? So, next slide, please. What's more important? Sorry. Next slide, please. Okay. So what's more important is that cyclists and pedestrians are the most vulnerable to road crashes and related to injury or death. So around road crashes involving cyclists in injury or death is almost around 70% of the time. While pedestrians naman make up around 44% of all fatalities during road crashes. So for this, if we want to continue to push for active transport because it's a viable option for everyone, we need safer roads. Next slide, please. So what are the key recommendations of the DOH on this? First is to redesign our road systems to include bicycle lanes and walking paths, specifically identify and protect lanes dedicated for cyclists. We need to clear obstruction and provide protective barriers, traffic cones, or lane markers. We need to establish network of bicycle routes that connect communities to essential services or destinations. It could be hospitals, schools, or markets. And finally, provide bike use facilities in these destinations. So it could be bike racks, bike parking spaces, especially in public establishments. Next slide, please. So here we're showing you a good model which is of a protective bike lane in Iloilo City. Next slide, please. We also have an ongoing project with the municipality of Cordova, Cebu. So they recently launched a 1.5 kilometer bike lane with the help of a grant coming from the DOH. And another 19.7 kilometers of bike lanes are actually planned to be developed between 2021 and 2025. So you'll see here just some of the preliminary indicators. Before, they didn't have any bike lanes. So after 1.5 has been established, their number of bicycle users has increased around 300 times. And because it was also well planned, we're looking at least zero crash for the year 2021 and hoping that it will continue to be so safe for everyone. Next slide, please. We also show you here an illustration of planned road use, which includes cycling lanes and walking paths. Sir Rob will probably be able to expound on this later on. So that said, we look at our reforms or our advocacy for active transport as an entry point for our, next slide please, for comprehensive safety road reforms. So next slide please. Some of the other things that we're looking at now are proposals for large trucks and their huge wheels, blind spots, and difficult maneuvering. Some things to address this. Next slide, please. And that will be to install these side guards, which will take minimal investments and save lives. Siguro minsan inisip nyo na, ano ba kami, doktor ba kami? Bakit ito yung pinag-uusapan namin? And I hope this presentation really shows you how important our work is as it relates to our counterparts in the transport sector, in the infrastructure sector, as well as with our civil society partners. Kailangan po namin talaga magtulungan because these are some things that are not within our expertise but will have large effects po on health and morbidity and mortality of Filipinos. On to my last two slides. Next slide, please. Oops, sorry, this was a misplaced slide. So as I mentioned this a while ago, so 70% of our road crashes actually involve cyclists. Next slide, please. Okay, so that with active transport, hindi lang po siya for the individual. Cyclists and pedestrians. So with that, I'll take this time, next slide please, to plug our active transport playbook once again, which we have, next slide please. I think this is updated. Next. Yes, next slide please. Yeah, to promote again our active transport playbook, local health system health promotion playbook, which is now available for LGUs in order for them to redesign their spaces in order to promote active transport. So with that, maraming salamat po ulit. We need road safety so that we have inclusive infrastructure and policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bev, and I think she was really able to clearly emphasize the need to improve yung road safety natin and promote those and protect those that are most vulnerable to road crashes and other related injuries and deaths. So Doc Bev also clearly emphasized then yung mga plans natin moving forward on to how do we further promote our initiatives toward road safety and active transport. So for our next speaker naman po, we have Mr. Robert C. He is a development economist, a city and regional planner, and public transport advocate. He is currently the co-convener of Move as One Coalition in advocating for a safer, more inclusive, and more human public transportation system in the Philippines. Mr. C, you have the floor po.
Thanks so much, Lindsay, and magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Let me also thank DOH for inviting me to talk about this very important topic. And I want to begin by saying, very often when we think of road safety, we think of, how we manage the motor vehicles on the roads. But what I'd like to talk about today is perhaps a different way of approaching road safety. Next slide, please. So the key message I want to deliver today is, in thinking about road safety, what we need to look at is how to protect the most vulnerable road users. And if we are able to protect the most vulnerable road users, usually all other road users will be protected as well. And one thing I think that you'll notice is that dahil sa pandemic, we are actually seeing a very large increase in the number of vulnerable road users. Next slide, please. So as Doc Bev has highlighted, really the vulnerable road users are pedestrians and cyclists, those who are not in motor vehicles. And when we think of what causes injuries or casualties, it's usually a uh, a motor vehicle that inflicts the injury on the people who are vulnerable. So let's analyze this a little bit and go into some detail on this. First, as Doc Bev has mentioned, the vast majority of Filipino households do not own cars and do not own motorcycles. So still the majority would be people who rely on public transport, walking and cycling. And yung first bullet dito, nationwide, less than 10% of Filipino households own cars, and in Metro Manila, only 12%. Yung second bullet dito is very important because when we look at who are the pedestrians, it includes, for example, children. And about 25% of our population are children who are 10 years old or younger. So that's a very large group in the population. The second part, the other bullet here is the elderly. About 8% of our population are 60 years old and older. Another bullet here is about persons with disability. The estimates in the past have been about 2%, pero I'm told actually much larger yata yung segment of the population with disability. So this might be even much larger than the 2% I've shown here. And pati na rin yung intoxicated. Because sometimes, even though we may have, we may be driving a motor vehicle, at some point maybe we are unable to drive that motor vehicle and we are forced into walking home, we become pedestrians. So whether or not we own a motor vehicle or not, we are pedestrians. And I want all of you to think about this because when I look at the strategies later, I want to relate it to this slide. Next slide, please. We also notice that for millions of Filipinos today, biking has become a necessity. Bakit po? I think we've seen that because of the shortage of public transport, dahil din sa physical distancing sa loob ng public transport, the capacity of public transport has diminished, has decreased. Kaya many people are now shifting into using a bike. You can also travel independently, and it reduces the pressure on limited public transport supply. And we are seeing this everywhere. Next slide, please. So just, observing even something like yung parking lots sa malls, we are seeing these filled with bikes sa mga offices, in front of commercial establishments. More and more people are using bikes, and even on our roads, I think all of us will agree, very visible yung increase in the number of cyclists. Next slide, please. So how should we adjust to this changing pattern? We need to begin by revising our priorities. So, importante po ito in terms of what we would call yung mindset change or yung paradigm shift. In the past, when we look at a road, yung main road user was always the car or some motor vehicle. And that is the pyramid, the triangle on the left. And what we need to do is actually to shift our mindset and our paradigm to this inverted triangle on the right, where we place at the highest priority yung most vulnerable, but also those in the majority, yung pedestrians, cyclists, and users of public transport. Sila dapat yung priority in terms of road use and in terms of which segment of the population we need to protect. Next slide, please. And here I want to bring in what we would call the safe system approach. And globally, this is what is considered yung road safety best practice. So if we look first at yung column on the left, under the word principles, what are the principles behind the safe system approach? First is we have to assume that humans make mistakes. And the second bullet point here is yung humans have physical limitations. So when we think back of the population, who are pedestrians, I think you remember that we pointed out mga 25% of the population are actually children of the age 10 and below. And we also have 8% of people who are senior citizens. You also have persons with disability. This very large segment of the population, this is a group that has natural physical limitations. So we need to create an environment which will human-proof yung road transport system. We should assume that humans will make mistakes and we need to protect them with the system that we will create. So what kind of system do we need? And here is where we have to look at yung column on the right under the words shared responsibility. So there are really four concepts, 4 points here under the shared responsibility. We need to have safe people, meaning humans need to follow traffic rules. And usually this is what we normally fall back on. We create more rules, we subject people to more training, we increase the penalties. Pero there is only so much we can do to make humans follow rules. Humans will make mistakes. So the bulk of responsibility here, the second bullet point, lies with those who design, who build, and who manage roads, those who drive the vehicles. And so what we need are safe speeds, safe roads, and safe vehicles. So we need to construct a system so that even if one part of the system fails, the vulnerable road users are still protected. So this is what we need in terms of building a safe road environment. Next slide, please. So one key principle, when we look all over the world for what is the top strategy to protect vulnerable road users, it has to do with speed limits. And one important prescription is if we can bring down yung speed limit to 30 kilometers or less, it will deliver dramatic results in terms of reducing the incidence of injury and fatality. So if you look at that box on the left, what it shows is when we bring uh, the speed down, you know, uh, with 50 kilometer per hour speed, there's still a 20% risk of dying. When you have 80 kilometers per hour speed, then you have a 60% probability of dying if you're involved in a collision. And yung chart on the right side, it shows that at lower speeds, really, the incidence of fatality is much, much lower, but it rises very fast with speed. So, how do we control yung speed limit? One is, of course, to have a sign saying, maximum speed is 30 kilometers per hour. But another way is to design our roads so that vehicles naturally slow down. So I think we see sometimes yung humps on the road, or what we call yung mga speed tables. Sometimes we also make the roads curve around so that vehicles slow down instead of having a very straight road which encourages vehicles to travel fast. So next slide, please. Another point is about yung quality of our pedestrian infrastructure. And I think all of us will agree it's nothing to be proud of in the Philippines. Generally, our road infrastructure has not favored pedestrians. So we can see even some of these pictures where the sidewalk is so tiny, hardly one person can fit, on that sidewalk. And very often, pedestrians are forced into climbing very steep footbridges, not accessible for persons with disability, the elderly, pregnant women, and small children. So we really need to change this environment, which has been very car-oriented and car-dependent. It forces people into greater car use rather than into more active transport. We need to reverse this trend. Next slide, please. A key point is that footbridges and underpasses, we should think about them only for expressways. And as much as possible, we should try to have what we call yung ground level, street level, at-grade crossings for pedestrians. Why? Because that is the most inclusive and safe type of infrastructure. In fact, in studies around the world, what they found was marami ring mga collisions na nangyayari right beside yung mga footbridges and underpasses. Why? Because many people are unable to climb stairs, and so they avoid using yung underpass or yung footbridge. Tumatawid na rin sila sa kalsada, and that's when you have collisions. So this is what we want to avoid by having at-grade pedestrian crossings. This is what we have in global best practice. Next slide, please. So we need better pedestrian infrastructure. So wide and clear and smooth footpaths, hindi pwedeng lubak-lubak. Paving materials should be such that they do not become slippery when wet. We need good lighting, so street lights, importante yun. Curb ramps are essential, especially for people who use wheelchairs, those who are mobility impaired. Yung curb ramps po, the slope that we see in some sidewalks so that yung wheelchairs can move through into the sidewalk smoothly. And this other concept called pedestrian refuge islands. So sa gitna ng kalsada, if you have a very wide road, Sometimes we will see an island constructed where we have a pedestrian lane so that pedestrians can wait in a small island before, instead of having to cross a very long pedestrian lane. Next slide, please. Another concept dito is to think about pedestrianizing our streets, especially today when we have a pandemic and people need also yung open space and green space in order to go out, get some sun, exercise, play, and refresh. And what we know is that where we have a well-ventilated area, it is much safer than just staying indoors in a very enclosed space. So we need to look at our streets also as potential areas for active transport, play, and exercise. So this is a concept that we see in many other countries where they are able to make some of their streets carless and at the same time make it more usable for the community, for children, for more green space. So even yung picture that you see in the lower right-hand corner, you can actually decorate, a pedestrianized street with more greenery, and then it becomes almost like a mini park in your own neighborhood. Next slide, please. And one advantage rin is we can use pedestrianized streets to revitalize our neighborhood and bring in new economic opportunities, especially for commercial enterprises or restaurants na mas preferred yung outdoors instead of indoor dining. Let's use our streets to provide that extra space. Next slide, please. So already in our national transport policy, we already have the directive from the national government. The national transport policy is already asking to give highest priority to the development of proper sidewalks and networks of bicycle lanes. So we already see some of this happening today. I think we don't have anyone from DOTR here, but one of the very bright spots is the budget under yung Bayanihan to Recover as One Act. There is a budget of 1.3 billion in order to build a bicycle network in Metro Cebu, Metro Davao, and Metro Manila. And I believe it will come to 532 kilometers of new protected bicycle lanes. So this is very good news. Next slide, please. One thing I want to point out, and I'm hoping media can also help us push for this with DPWH. If we look inside yung national budget for 2021, under the DPWH budget, there is something called Special Provision 23. And Special Provision 23 in our General Appropriations Act, it requires all DPWH road and bridge construction or rehabilitation projects to include protected lanes for pedestrians and bicycles and light mobility devices. And it also requires that all pedestrian crossings be at grade or at ground level. And when we think of this is a very large budget. So in 2021, DPWH has a budget of 274 billion for road and bridge projects. And we hope that they will apply yung special provision and construct proper sidewalks, proper protected bicycle lanes on all these roads. This is a very large budget. It includes 17 billion for roads to tourism sites, 13 billion for roads to economic zones, 4.3 billion for roads leading to seaports, airports, and railways, and also 0.35 billion assistance to cities. So this is a very large resource that all of us can use to push for active transport infrastructure. Next slide, please. And when we think of it, this is really what Filipinos want. I want to highlight a survey. Actually, this was commissioned by DOH, and maybe later on we can talk more about this. They asked Filipinos whether they agree or disagree with this statement. The statement was, "It is possible for my city and municipality to become a great place for walking and cycling." And 85% of Filipinos nationwide want their localities to become great places for walking and cycling. And this includes even people who own motorcycles, who own cars. They agree with this statement. Next slide, please. This also highlights the preference that Filipinos have for who should use roads. And here we find that the same survey, 87% of Filipinos want priority on roads to be given to public transportation, bicycles, and pedestrians. Today, what is prioritized on our roads are motor vehicles. And as we know, they are in the minority. The vast majority of Filipinos from all income classes want priority for public transportation, bicycles, and pedestrians. So this really gives us the mandate to shift the use of our roads into more sustainable mobility choices. And I'm hoping that media can help us push in this direction and also change mindsets of our decision makers. Next slide, please. So finally, just a summary slide. Road safety is about prioritizing the road space for pedestrians, cyclists, and public transport. So this is about moving people, not cars. Second is about reducing speed limits. Third is about making infrastructure for walking and cycling as safe and attractive as possible so that we attract more people, even those who use cars or motorcycles, to shift into walking and cycling. Fourth bullet is to avoid pedestrian footbridges and underpasses. And fifth is about thinking about pedestrianization of our streets. So this is really, in a nutshell, the key messages for us today. Next slide. So thank you very much to all. Let's keep our vulnerable road users safe. Thank you very much po. Back to you, Lindsay.
Thank you very much, Mr. C, for that very, very informative and comprehensive presentation na talaga namang binigyan tayo ng iba't ibang perspectives on how should we be talking about road safety and active transport in the Philippines. So for those who just entered po our Kapihan session, Mr. Robert C, again, is a development economist. He is also a city and regional planner and a public transport advocate. And he is currently the co-convener of Move as One Coalition in advocating for a safer, more inclusive, and more human public transportation system in the Philippines. So I think we are now ready for the question and answer po from our media. And of course, if our participants from the CHDs would also like to raise their questions or clarifications, please free to do so po. So I will be calling on po muna yung our partners from the media who initially indicated their questions in our chat box po. So can we have Miss Caroline Bongkin po from CNN? Is Miss Caroline still here po? Okay, Mr. Red Mendoza also manifested that he would like to ask question po.
Hi po, good morning. Good morning po, Mr. C, fellow columnist of ours sa Manila Times po. Good morning po. Sir Robert, ito lang po kasi we know that pedestrianization is a huge goal. Of course, we are now seeing yung mga developments on road safe on aims on pedestrianization on our major thoroughfares, major roads. But how about po yung mga maliliit na streets, eskinitas, yung mga basically yung mga streets where yung mga nasa barangay level, mga minor roads kung saan dumadaan. I know po na there are some cities who are already developing pedestrian walkways in their own localities, pero hindi pa rin natin maiwasan po, sir, na yung iba naglalakad pa rin sa may malapit na sa may gitna ng kalye. And how can we be able to convince local officials na napaka-importante to pedestrianize not only their major thoroughfares but also yung mga streets. I know yung sa mga villages, subdivisions, pedestrianize yan. Pwedeng maglakad tao dyan. Pero how about yung mga locality and especially sa mga probinsya na hindi naman ganun ka pedestrian friendly yung mga kalsada po?
That's a very good question, Red. In the past po, I think we've always thought of yung streets as being reserved for motor vehicles. Pero we need to think nga of turning that around. And actually, the biggest potential would be yun na nga on yung secondary streets where actually very large neighborhoods could actually make their neighborhoods relatively car-free. And now, what do I mean by this? I think there are two ways to do this. One is to make yung speed limit very low in some of these neighborhoods so that yung whatever vehicles are passing will be really moving at a safe speed. Another way is to designate what we call certain streets as only for or not to allow through traffic. So, anong ibig sabihin nito? Certain streets should only be passable for vehicles owned by people in those neighborhoods, meaning those streets are closed to through traffic. So what a city or barangay or municipality needs to do is maybe map out which streets are allowed for vehicle through traffic. Tapos yung mga iba should be preventing yung vehicle through traffic. So once we do that, those types of streets would be ideal for what we call pedestrianization or even more community use of the street space for exercise, play, and even social activities and green space. So this can be something that we can emulate. Actually, this is already practiced in many European countries, even places with very narrow streets. And I think we can practice it as well in Philippine cities. Thank you po.
Okay po. Thank you po, Sir Robert. Kasi we know naman po na very different nga po yung situation natin. Kasi may ibang mga lugar na may mga pedestrian walkways. Ang ibang pedestrian walkways nga po isa pa may mga vendors and all. Siguro last question on my end lang po. I quite notice lang po yung inyong isa last slide na wag pong magtayo ng mga footbridges or
Yes.
underpasses.
Yes.
Paki-explain lang po kasi baka ma-confuse lang po yung mga tao, yung mga readers namin. I know, well, of course, yung footbridges kasi it allows crossing from one place to another. Pero paano po yung pagtatanggal ng mga footbridges and underpasses would contribute po sa ating aim to be more mobile? Kasi alam ko po, gusto ko po maglakad. I mean, gusto ko po maglakad talaga, pero of course, we can't be just possibly crossing down the street lang ng ora-orada, basa-basa na lang po. So how can removing overpasses and underpasses be able to help in our aim to be more mobile or be more active? Yung lang po. Salamat po.
Yeah, thank you very much, Red. I just want to point out kasi yung the history of footbridges and underpasses, they were created largely to prioritize yung cars on our roads. Kasi if you have a footbridge, tatanggalin yung normal pedestrian lane. So, hindi na titigil yung mga vehicles on the roads, right? It actually enables yung vehicles to move faster. So this was really in a way the intention to prioritize motor vehicles over pedestrians in the use of road space. But what we realized when this happened is that footbridges end up excluding a very large portion of the population. Yung portion na hindi nakakaakyat ng mga stairways, they will now be prevented from crossing. So this is, I think, something which unfortunately reduces the mobility of the larger population. Tapos it also does not generate the safety results that we would like, because like I mentioned earlier, kung minsan tumatawid rin sila even without a pedestrian, the safety of a pedestrian lane, because they are unable to climb the stairs. I think another key point is maybe I can bring an example of that we have in Korea, where you've heard of yung Gangnam style. Yung Gangnam Road in Seoul is like their EDSA, and actually it has, it's like a 5-lane highway with also a bus system running down the center, and it is able to have at-grade pedestrian crossings. So if you can imagine, parang EDSA nila ito, but every stoplight may pedestrian crossing. And this is one way that they are able to manage yung flow of vehicles, but at the same time accommodate yung those who are also pedestrians on this major road by actually synchronizing yung traffic signals to allow pedestrians to move across the street and also vehicles when their turn comes. So this is an example where a road like EDSA could have pedestrian crossings at major intersections. That is definitely quite possible.
Okay po. Salamat po.
Okay, may we now call on Miss Karen Villanda po of PTV4 for her question.
Yes po,
Karen.
good morning po. Yes po, good morning po.
Good morning, Karen.
Yes po. Maybe for DOH and also kay Sir Robert na din. Kasi nag-uumpisa na pong uminit yung panahon. And ang tatanungin ko lang po, ang sinabi niyo po ay magbigay tayo ng priority sa mga cyclists along the road. Pero umiinit na po. May mga paalala po ba tayo sa mga motorista lalo na po sa heat stroke? So sa DOH po, kung ano po ba yung mga sintomas and then ano po yung gagawin ng isang cyclist at lalong-lalo na po paano po nila maiwasan ito?
Thank you for your question. So meron tayong tinatawag na heat exhaustion, no, at heat stroke. So two very different interventions siya, pero minsan no palit natin. So in both cases po, syempre no, it is brought about by extreme heat nga, sabi natin. Pero meron mga konting difference no, kapag sinabi po natin na heat stroke, ito yung mga gusto natin na kailangan po magpakonsulta na sa nearest healthcare provider. While yung heat exhaustion naman, kaya pong magkaroon tayo ng mga relieving intervention. So kapag sinabi po natin na heat exhaustion po ito yung parang dahil sa sobrang init, medyo nahihilo or parang mahihimatay po, nagpapawis po, no? So kapag hinawakan po yung mga kamay nila, ang tawag natin ay cold and clammy, no? Medyo malamig, tapos pwedeng masuka-suka, at yung pulso nila medyo mabilis, pero very weak, no? So may muscle cramps din sila possibly. So kapag mga heat exhaustion po, yung ina-advise lang natin is syempre magpapahinga under the shade or in a cooler temperature, di ba? Tapos angat lang yung paa para ma-promote po yung circulation. No? Tapos syempre, inom ng water. Pero kapag heat stroke siya, makikita nyo po yung ulo, medyo, ang tawag namin doon ay throbbing headache. No? So yung sakit ng ulo, parang pumipitik-pitik, hindi po siya nagpapawis. No? So nagpipitik yung ulo pero hindi nagpapawis. Tapos medyo mainit yung mga mukha, tapos very dry yung skin. No? Sabi ko kanina yung sa exhaustion, mabasa-basa, no? Cold and clammy. Pero ito, tuyo, mainit. No? And then you have vomiting as well. Tapos yung pulse is, again, no? Parang sa ulo, throbbing, malakas yung pintig. And then for this one, sa heat stroke, yun yung pwede pong mawalan ng malay. So anytime na you have these symptoms of heat stroke, the advice is really to seek, no? So parang emergency po to, kailangan pumunta na po sa health facility.
Just before na lumabas sila ng bahay, ano po yung whether heat exhaustion or heat stroke, ano yung pwede nilang i-prepare para sa sarili nila?
So in general, 'di ba, kailangan alam natin no yung path na dadaanan natin. Hindi sa lahat ng areas no may shade siya, no. So we also need to check the weather, 'di ba? Whether masyadong maaraw for that day or uulan, dapat alam natin so we bring the correct gear, 'di ba? Second is yung clothing natin. Kung alam natin na medyo mainit for that day, then dapat appropriate din yung suot natin. We need to bring the water that's needed. And then syempre, kung alam natin na specifically no, sobrang init nung araw na yon, we actually will advise that the cyclist no, or the pedestrian, the person who walks will have to stop no, from time to time. Hindi yung parang pipilitin nating matapos siya in a shorter period of time. Pero sa super init, tuloy-tuloy po tayong exposed. So little things asking us to be a little bit more sensitive of what we're feeling and to also really plan around the weather forecast.
Thank you very much po.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you po. Now we have Mr. Gerard de la Peña from TV5.
Yes, hi, good morning. My question is for Mr. Robert C. Sorry sir, alam ko nabanggit na po to kanina pero para maayos lang po yung visuals natin for TV. Papa-expound ko lang po, paano po na naging generally not safe for pedestrians ang ating Philippine road infrastructures at paano po ang dapat nating gawin para ma-revise yung priorities po natin?
Very good question, Gerard. Actually required sa mga design guidelines for roads yung dapat may sidewalk. But in the past, naging priority yung kalsada para sa mga motor vehicles. So what happened is, maski yung mga sidewalks na nandun dati, over time, these were taken up in order to provide more road space for motor vehicles. And yun na nga problematic yung trend na yun. We have to reverse it in order to give more space back to pedestrians and cyclists. In our view, it would be a very good decision kasi we would be able to move more people using the same road space. Kasi po, actually, pedestrians and cyclists, you can move a higher volume of people using the same road space devoted to a bike lane or a sidewalk than devoted to a car. Yung space for motor vehicles, actually, devoting roads for motor vehicles is today the least efficient use of the road space. Yung most efficient would be mass transit, and then pedestrians, and then cyclists. So these three are very efficient uses of road space. Dapat we should actually shift back some of the road space to these sustainable mobility options. Thank you po.
Sir, pahabol na tanong lang po kasi we've noticed na naglalagay na po ng bike lanes ngayon sa EDSA and some other minor roads po. How would you assess the DOTR's efforts to do these things, and ano pa po yung mga pwede nilang gawin or ano pa po yung kulang?
Actually po, this is a great effort, and it's really in a way, a partnership between DOH, DPWH, DILG, and DOTR, although DOTR has been taking the lead. But this common effort, they've been able to allocate yung funds in order to create what we would call a bicycle lane network in our major cities. So Metro Manila, Metro Davao, Metro Cebu. I can just give you some of the statistics. Sa Metro Cebu, this will create 139 kilometers of protected bicycle lanes. Sa Metro Davao po, 54 kilometers of protected bicycle lanes. And in Metro Manila, 339 kilometers of protected bicycle lanes. So in addition to this, may mga local governments din na nagko-construct ng mga bicycle lanes. And I just want to cite, for example, yung Quezon City, where they are building about 93 kilometers of their own bicycle lanes in order to complement the larger network. So these will all be completed in the next few months. Actually, mabilis na to eh. I think many of you have noticed. And once we create this network, it will change the character of mobility in our city, in that we will make it a lot more bicycle friendly, and cycling will become a mainstream option because we will make it safe. And we need to continue to push in this direction, not only sa major cities, but in all our municipalities, all our urban areas. Thank you po.
Thank you, sir. Last question na po for Dr. Beverly Ho. I know road safety is a public health concern. Ngayong pandemic po, ano napansin yung dynamic sa mga kalye natin? Mas marami bang nadidisgrasya given that mas marami ang nagbabike at naglalakad ngayong panahon ng pandemya?
So ngayon po, no, we're still consolidating the information that's coming out from our info system, because yung nasa amin po usually is yung na-admit lang, no, and we have to actually align that with the information that goes into the local government unit. So pag sa Metro Manila, yun yung sa MMDA. So we will be able to update you once we're able to consolidate this information pretty soon. Salamat!
Thank you po. That's all from me.
Thank you, Mr. Michael Flores from AFP. You may now ask your question po.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good morning, Mr. C. Sir, I just wanted to ask you, because of I'm also an active transport user. I bike both for exercise and for getting from point A to point B. How would you now assess, the level of protection accorded to bikers nowadays? Because, for example, in EDSA, we see a dedicated bike lane, but many portions are not protected. So how protected are bike users nowadays, and what gaps do you still want to be filled in terms of making them more safe in the roads? And second question, how would you now characterize the behaviors of motor vehicle users towards bikers? Kasi before they don't respect bike lanes, no? And uh, uh, how has the behavior changed, if at all they did? Yeah.
Two very good questions, Mikhail. Thank you. So in terms of yung bike lanes, what we have is a good start. And what we need to recognize is what we have put up in yung Metro Cebu, Metro Davao, Metro Manila. These are bike lanes of a pop-up nature, meaning very basic pa yung infrastructure. And what we need nga is much improved protection and safety. So what do we mean by this? In order to bring our bike lanes to the standard that we have in, for example, yung mga developed countries like the Netherlands or Denmark, we need to actually look also at the width. We might need to expand the width of some of these bike lanes. Yung pavement quality, kasi a lot of our improvements today have been focused on yung separation, yung barriers. But very often we have not yet touched on the quality of the pavement. So in many places, we still have large potholes. Sometimes may mga grates na pwedeng lumusot yung gulong ng bisikleta, very dangerous for cyclists. We need to correct all of this. And this needs to be a continuing effort. So I'm hoping that we will still have a significant budget in 2022 that will enable DPWH, MMDA, DOTR to continue this good work. I just want to highlight also MMDA Chair Benher Abalos. He really wants these bike lanes to be international standard. That's where we need to go. So this is what we need to continue to push. Ngayon, maganda rin yung question ni Mikhail. What has been the behavior of motor vehicle users? I think yung experience so far has been mixed because in some cases, yung motor vehicle users and sometimes even yung public transport drivers, they are not happy with yung bike lanes kasi I think for one, it takes up some of the road space. I think on another point, maybe for some PUV operators, they also see baka mas konti yung magiging pasahero nila. They will have fewer customers if more and more people shift to cycling. But we need to think of this in a different way. I think for motor vehicle users, we need to think of more cyclists on the road as actually being the best weapon to fight congestion. Kasi the more people shift from using a motorcycle or a car, and if they shift to walking and cycling, we will actually reduce traffic congestion. And even for the PUV operators, many people who are pedestrians or who choose to walk, they also will use now public transport more actively. So we need to have a more welcoming and open mind about yung bicycle lanes. It will be a lot better for all of us, especially yung concept ng pollution. Not just yung air pollution, but even noise pollution. The fewer vehicles motor vehicles we have on our roads, and if more people walk and cycle, we will have a much more livable city. And that's, I think, what all of us would want. Thank you.
Mr. C, just another question. I hope you don't mind. How on the other hand, how do you also make bikers accountable to obeying and respecting traffic signs? Because I don't have the statistics, but anecdotally, whenever I go out and bike, I see a lot of kapajaks, disregarding
Yes.
traffic signs, not giving way to pedestrians. So how do we also improve accountability on the part of active road users, active transport users, active
That's
transport
very,
users?
very, very good point, Mikhail. Siyempre, uh, public information and also uh, uh, giving people more knowledge about safe cycling, I think, is important. One suggestion we have is for the Department of Education to also include, uh, cycling good practice as part of their uh, physical education program. Uh, it would be great, sana, if every primary school student would also become a good cyclist, so they would learn how to use a bicycle as part of yung physical education, but also learn yung good cycling and safe cycling practice. So sana po if we can bring this into our educational system, it would also make a big difference po.
Thank you, Mr. C.
Thank you very much. Miss Catherine Gonzalez, were they able to answer your question na po, or do you want to ask more questions? Or okay na?
Sige po, I'll still ask it. Good morning po kay Sir Robert. Sir, yung na-mention niyo po kanina about pedestrianizing our streets. I think the idea seems to be good. Pero ang question ko po is, considering yung road situation sa Philippines and the volume of cars and yung sikip po ng mga kalsada sa atin, how feasible is this proposal po?
Thank you, Catherine. Actually, I see it as the one good solution. Kasi po, the more people we can get to walk or cycle safely, it helps to reduce yung load on our roads, and it will reduce the number of vehicles. I think the important message also is that if we create safe cycling and walking networks, then we will attract more and more people to take up active transport. And I also want to thank DOH for yung active transport playbook, which Doc Bev mentioned. This can be a very good resource for all our LGUs, including at the barangay level. Kasi maraming ideas doon of what they can implement right away with their own resources. So I'm hoping the more people take it up, it will actually make our streets safer, less congested, less polluted, cleaner. I think it's really one good path to a better Philippines. Thank you po.
Thank you po, Sir Robert.
Okay. Doc Bev, if we could also answer yung isang question na ni-raise sa chat ni Ms. Caroline Bongkin about if we have an information or data kung ilang percent ng total cases natin sa injury ang attributable or dahil sa paggamit ng public transportation.
Basically, Lindsay, the data, what we have is what we've shown on screen a while ago, which just points to that most of the injuries are caused by certain vehicle types. And admittedly, when we talk about these vehicle types and then we link it to what was shown also by Sir Rob, diba, who is more actually parang predominantly disadvantaged in any type of crash, no? Is it the one inside the vehicle, or is it the one that's commuting, no? Or that's on the receiving end? So yung pinakita natin, that's actually the data. No? So 57,000 pedestrians hit by vehicles just within Metro Manila between 2005 and 2015.
Thank you po, Doc Bev.
Thank
We
you.
have other questions from our media and our participants from the CHDs.
Lindsay, can I add one point?
Sure po, sir.
Yeah, since we have a lot of media here, I think there's one very good point also in terms of like reporting, and that is the use of the word accident. I think if you notice, see, Doc Bev and I avoid the use of the word accident, and we use instead yung word like road crash or collision. And I think it's good practice nga to adopt that convention. Kasi po, we want to move away from yung giving the impression na if it's an accident, it's like no one's fault, di ba? Pero we know that there are ways that we could prevent a lot of the injuries, fatalities that happen on our roads. And so media has a big part to play. So that's one very, I think, maybe good practice that media could adopt as well. Thank you po.
Agree po. Thank you very much, Mr. C. So before we wrap up our Kapihan session, if we have no more further questions from the media and from our participants, maybe we could invite again Doc Bev for her final message or key takeaways.
We'd just like to thank all our partners for joining us this morning, and we sincerely hope that you can help us also shape not just the decision makers, but also the public's continuous views on road safety and how we can all contribute to this. And all of the major changes or reforms that we want to happen in each sector, there will need to be a critical mass and demand from the public. And we are seeing that for active transport, but we hope that with everyone's support, continues yung advocacy natin, and knowing that the country is made up of 1,500 plus cities and municipalities, it will be important for us to get this message across to as many decision makers as possible. So maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Doc. Mr. Robert C., do you have any other final messages po for our viewers?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. Just a very short point. I know for all of us here, the pandemic seems like such a huge problem. And I just want to say that there are many also bright spots. And one very bright spot is the attention and in a way, the focus that people now are giving to yung active transport and sustainable mobility. And we are seeing that happen actually very fast. We are seeing a very rapid transformation. And I'm hoping we can come out of this into a better normal. So this is really what we all need to push for, that we come out of this crisis better, stronger, and with a more livable Philippines. So thank you very much po.
Thank you very much po, sir. Again, gusto lang din natin i-emphasize na this initiative that our initiatives for promoting road safety and active transport ay talaga pong is a shared responsibility among the public, of course, and yung mga users, active transport users natin, and of course, ng mga national government agencies to really push for enabling policies and other interventions for us to have a more livable environment po para sa ating mga commuters po and mga public transport users. So again, we would like to thank po Dr. Beverly Lorraine Ho of Health Promotion Bureau, Mr. Robert C. of Move as One Coalitions, our media partners, our representatives po from the CHDs, and all our viewers. And of course, maraming salamat po, and tulungan niyo po kami to ensure that safety first on the road para sa isang healthy Pilipinas. Thank you po and magandang umaga.